My name is Leo Vance. I'm the most devoted man in Westridge. Or I was. After graduation, my dorm mates, Rick, Cody, Gene, and I, full of ambition, pooled our resources and founded Nexus Games in a rented 600-square-foot office. In the early days, we were bleeding money. The four of us had to wear every hat imaginable. One minute, we were programmers coding the game. The next, we were salespeople cold calling potential clients, and we'd have to switch to customer service on a dime. To cut costs even further, Rick took it upon himself to fix all our office equipment. Cody used every spare moment to teach himself accounting, taking the lead on managing our chaotic finances. We gritted our teeth and pushed through like that for 6 months until we finally launched our first title, a paranormal mobile game called Ethereal Echoes. With its high-quality production and mind-bending plot, the game was a massive hit with players. Positive reviews flooded in, and Nexus Games started making a name for itself in the industry. But success breeds envy. As our profile grew, we quickly became a target for our competitors. The most vicious of them was Dominion Entertainment, a corporation that got its start peddling risque games with predatory gotcha mechanics. Their CEO, Don Wagner, suddenly launched a public crusade, a call to action against harmful games and media corrupting our youth. Using the protect the children angle as a smokescreen, he secretly lobbied regulators to crack down on the industry. Overnight, a wave of games and web novels with supernatural or suggestive themes were forced off the market. Because Ethereal Echoes had some paranormal and fantasy elements, we got swept up in the purge. This sudden cleanup completely choked off our revenue stream. Gene was so furious, he talked about building a pipe bomb and taking Wagner down with him. We hadn't even come close to recouping our development and operational costs. With the game pulled and our cash flow gone, Nexus couldn't hold on. We declared bankruptcy. Worse, when the company folded, the four of us founders were suddenly saddled with a mountain of personal debt. The four of us were squatting on the floor of our empty office. A mess of crumpled debt notices spread across a desk. We sighed and groaned, a pile of cigarette butts growing in a nearby tray, completely out of ideas. That's when Isabella Thorne showed up and said she could help. Isabella was a couple of years ahead of us in college. She was beautiful, came from a ridiculously wealthy family, and wouldn't have been out of place on a reality show about the super rich. I dealt with her in student government, but I never really liked her, because, at her core, she was a total simp. Not for me, of course. She was obsessed with her childhood friend, Connor Hayes. Most people went to college to get an education and build a future. She seemed to be there to act out her own personal soap opera. She and Connor were dating, but he was never the faithful type, always messing around on the side. You could often find pictures on campus gossip sites of her confronting him and making a scene in public. After we got to know each other in student government, she went through a weird phase where she kept trying to get me to let her sponsor me. She wanted to pay me to pretend to be her boyfriend to make Connor jealous. She offered $50,000 a month. My roommates found out and gave me endless grief about it, telling me I should just take one for the team, accept her offer, and then turn around and sponsor them with the money. Naturally, I turned her down flat. My family wasn't wealthy, but we weren't so broke that I needed to become a kept man to survive. Besides, it's not like I couldn't if I wanted to. I'm a good-looking guy. If I'd really wanted to find a rich girlfriend to be my meal ticket for 4 years, I could have. After graduation, I hadn't heard a thing about Isabella or Connor. I never expected her to show up now. Of all times, years later. I suspected she'd been nursing a crush on me this whole time, secretly keeping tabs on my life. I have to admit, her timing was impeccable. With the amount of debt the four of us were in, it would take a decade, maybe more, to pay it all off. What made it worse was that starting the company had been a group decision, but I was the one who first proposed it. Now that everything had gone south, Rick, Cody, and Gene were all busy begging their families for money and trying to figure a way out, without a single word of blame for me. The guilt was eating me alive. I felt like I had to shoulder more of the responsibility. So I decided to hear Isabella out, to see what her angle was. As we sat in the empty office, I slowly got the full story. It turned out she and Connor had broken up not long after graduation. He'd moved overseas, and she'd stayed home to help run her family's corporation. For the last couple of years, her family had been pressuring her relentlessly to get married. She was an only child, and her parents were desperate for her to find a husband who would marry into the family. At the very least, they insisted that any future children take her last name, Thorne. Then, recently, she'd somehow heard about my company going bankrupt and decided to seek me out. She wanted me to marry into her family. Honestly, listening to her, I was skeptical. The world isn't full of convenient coincidences. Most chance encounters are just carefully planned ambushes. It was like back when I had a crush on a girl and would intentionally take a detour to bump into her on her usual route. But once the feelings were gone, we could live in the same city our whole lives and never cross paths again. But those doubts weren't my biggest concern right now. What stopped me from immediately refusing was the offer she laid out. The part about her paying off all our debts was just too tempting to ignore. Still, I had my reservations. If Isabella just wanted me as a boy toy, that was one thing. I could treat it as manual labor to pay off a debt. Even if she wanted me to have a kid that would take her name, that wasn't a huge deal. Most people my age don't really care if the kid takes the father's or mother's surname anymore. But getting married? That made me hesitate, considering the toxic on-again, off-again drama she had with Connor in college. What if he came back to the States one day? I'd be getting cheated on left and right. So, I tried to subtly suggest that I was open to being a boy toy. For my friends, I was willing to be a gigolo, but I drew the line at being played for a fool. That suggestion just set her off. She stared me down and snapped. "You'd rather be my boy toy than my husband?" Her question left me speechless. I quickly tried to explain myself, and after a while, she finally seemed to understand my hesitation. Her face went cold, her tone a mix of hurt and defiance. "What? Do you think I'm that pathetic? That I'm still hung up on some cheating jerk who dumped me?" She said it with such conviction, swearing up and down. She promised that if I married into her family and behaved myself, she would never, ever cheat on me. Finally, she laid down the ultimatum. "I won't help you unless you marry me. That's the only way." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of the empty office. On one side was the crushing debt my friends and I were under. On the other was Isabella's non-negotiable offer. In the end, I gritted my teeth and gave in. Compared to letting my friends suffer because of me, this sacrifice didn't seem so hard to bear. Soon after, I received the payment from Isabella and settled all the company's debts. When Rick, Cody, and Jean found out I was going to marry into her family, the looks on their faces were a complicated mix of shock, helplessness, and a kind of awkward pity. No one said a word for a long time. Finally, Rick clapped me on the shoulder and said gruffly, "If you ever need anything, don't try to tough it out alone. Call us." Cody and Jean nodded in agreement. They didn't ask questions, which meant more than any words could. As we were packing up the last of our things, we finally talked about our plans. Cody was heading back home to Appalachia. His family owned a piece of land on a mountain that was waiting for him. It was an obligation he couldn't escape. Jin's family was pushing him to go to France to take over their winery business. Rick, clutching the last of his savings, said he wanted to give it another shot to see if he could make a comeback in the game industry. There were no sentimental goodbyes. It was just like any other night after working late, each of us heading back to our respective apartments. Except this time, we had no idea when we'd all be together again. Once everything was settled, Isabella said she wanted me to meet her parents. I was a nervous wreck on the way there, imagining all the ways I'd be belittled for being a gold digger. I even mentally rehearsed scenes from movies where the poor boyfriend gets humiliated by the rich parents. But when we arrived, I realized I'd overthought it. Isabella's mother held my hand and kept repeating, "Isabella can be blunt. You have to be good to her." Her father chatted with me professionally, asking about my experience in the gaming industry and my plans for the future. His attitude wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either. It felt more like a job interview. The next morning, Isabella and I went to sign the prenuptial agreement. The terms were crystal clear. Her assets were hers alone, and in the event of a divorce, I had no claim to any of her family's wealth. After signing, we went straight to City Hall. I was still in a daze when they handed us the marriage license. Just a short while ago, I was losing sleep over debt, and now I was someone's husband, married into their family. Life's plot twists were stranger than any game we'd ever designed. Before I could even process the fact that we were legally married, Isabella was grabbing my wrist and pulling me to her hotel down the street. walking so fast it was like she thought I'd bolt. Once in the room, her cool fingertips traced a line across my stomach, making my whole body tense up. The way she looked at me, I felt less like a husband and more like a rabbit cornered by a wolf. The next morning, I woke up and saw a small red stain on the sheets. My mind went blank. I instinctively looked over at Isabella. She just smiled, looking perfectly at ease, even a little smug. "What do you think? I had a procedure done just for you. Are you moved?" As soon as she said that, any genuine emotion I might have been feeling shattered into a million pieces. Damn it. Give me back my moment of genuine surprise. After Isabella left, I finally pulled out my phone and called my parents. When they heard that I'd not only gotten married without telling them, but had also married into a family to pay off my debts, they exploded. After hanging up, I felt a pang of guilt, but it was fleeting. If I had actually asked my parents to help me with that debt, that would have been the real betrayal, forcing them to suffer along with me. I sent my mom a text, telling her I'd let them know once the wedding was planned, and that they didn't need to come out before then. It would save my dad the trouble of taking his belt to me. The wedding went off without a hitch. The Thorne family paid for everything, and it was a massive, lavish affair. The decorations alone cost millions. During the reception, it was impossible to ignore the whispers from Isabella's relatives. Their eyes scanned over me, and their hushed comments were all the same. "This son-in-law sure is lucky, or he must be after the family's money." I heard every word, but I didn't let it get to me. I have thick skin, and besides, they weren't wrong. I was the one getting the better end of this deal. She had cleared my debt. A few snide remarks wouldn't kill me. There was no point in being sensitive about it. For the first few months of our marriage, I did grunt work in one of the Thorne Corporation's junior departments, filing documents, coordinating logistics, mindless tasks that required no real skill. It was a pretty cushy gig. The real work was Isabella. She seemed to have an insatiable appetite for, well, me. It went from being an exciting novelty to being utterly exhausting. After months of her relentless demands, the pregnancy test finally showed 2 lines. I breathed a huge sigh of relief. My body could finally get a vacation. As Isabella's pregnancy became more obvious and her mobility decreased, her father's attitude toward me changed dramatically. He started bringing me along with him everywhere. I'd sit in on his meetings, he'd have me join him with clients, and he slowly began teaching me the ins and outs of the family business, from project management and cost analysis to networking. He was surprisingly patient. I was a diligent student. After all, relying on my physical labor wasn't a long-term plan. Learning some real skills couldn't hurt. Isabella's affection for me was conditional. When the mood struck, she'd flirt and be playful. When it didn't, I was invisible. There was no deep, romantic connection. Most of the time, I felt like a convenient and satisfying bed partner. Sometimes, watching her stare off into space while rubbing her belly, I'd think to myself that if life could just stay this stable and peaceful, it wouldn't be so bad. Over the next 5 years, I became the Thorne family's golden workhorse. I was managing the majority of the company's business. Everything from major project decisions to team management crossed my desk. But all the company's stock remained in her father's name. I didn't even have a single share of my own. As for the big promise he always dangled in front of me, "When you're and Isabella's son, Mason, turns 18, I'll give you 20% of the company." I'd heard it a dozen times, but I never took it seriously. By the time Mason turned 18, I figured I'd barely have time to get the shares in my name before they were logically transferred to him. In the end, it would all stay in the Thorne family. Even the car I drove wasn't mine. It was registered in Isabella's name. I was just the authorized user. The only money I had complete control over was my monthly salary of $50,000. It seemed I couldn't escape my fate of being sponsored for $50,000 a month. I sent most of it to my parents. I knew exactly what her father was doing. It was a classic management tactic. Let me get a taste of the high life, then dangle a far-off carrot to keep me motivated and willing to work myself to the bone for his family. But 2 could play at that game. After Nexus Games dissolved, Rick never gave up. He hustled for 2 years and scraped together enough money to start a new company, Pantheon Games. The new game he launched last year, Olympus, became a national sensation overnight. Its revenue broke $100 million in the first month. Very few people knew that the initial seed money for the game came from me, funneled through the Thorn Corporation's investment channels. Since it was a legitimate business investment and the game was a hit, the Thorn family made a hefty profit. Seeing how hard I'd worked over the years, Isabella's father was willing to do me that favor. Rick knew I had pulled strings to help him and, still feeling indebted to me for taking the fall for our old company's debt, insisted on giving me a personal stake in Pantheon. But given my complicated situation as the husband who married in, I wanted an escape plan. I couldn't accept the shares myself, so I had him transfer them directly to my parents. I really hadn't been a good son these past few years. After our son, Mason, was born, they only came to visit maybe twice a year. The main reason was the gossip from the Thorn relatives at our wedding. The things they heard had left a sour taste in their mouths, and they'd been reluctant to visit the city ever since. I was always swamped with work, so I could only make it back to my hometown to see them 2 or 3 times a year. Isabella never came with me for the holidays, always complaining about how rustic and basic it was there. But now, things were different. With the dividends from Rick's company, my parents were able to buy a large villa, drive cars they never dreamed of owning, and had millions in the bank. They could spend their days traveling, gardening, and just enjoying life. I kept in touch with Cody and Jean, too. They'd occasionally send me specialties from their parts of the world. Last year, Cody sent a small wooden box from Appalachia. Inside was a bright green worm-like root. A note was attached. This is an old family remedy. A vitality tincture. It'll boost your stamina. Looking at the wriggling thing, I thought it was some kind of creepy prank. But later, after another exhausting night with Isabella, I figured, what the hell? A friend of so many years wouldn't try to poison me. I took it, and the effects were potent. The balance of power in the bedroom shifted decidedly in my favor. If Cody's gift was creepy, Jin's was pure shock and awe. Last month, he sent a large wooden crate from France. I opened it to find a modified high-powered sniper rifle with a box of ammunition. My heart nearly leaped out of my chest. I called him immediately and told him, in no uncertain terms, to never send me anything like that ever again. Then I took the rifle back to my parents' place and stashed it, just in case. A future family heirloom. Maybe, if life had just continued on like this, I would have been fine with it. Work at the Thorn Corporation during the day, come home, play with Mason, help him with his homework at night. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was stable. But I was always so busy that Isabella ended up spending the most time with Mason. She was not like other mothers. This was Isabella, Thorne raising a child. She never went anywhere without a chauffeur-driven SUV and 2 maids to carry her things. She never had to struggle with a stroller on an escalator or chase a screaming toddler through a crowded theme park. Compared to his often absent father, Isabella gave Mason everything he ever wanted. So, naturally, he was more attached to his mother. Being spoiled like that, Mason often threw tantrums and made unreasonable demands. I couldn't stand to see him act like a little prince. Whenever he crossed the line, I disciplined him, whether it was a stern talking to or a timeout. Whenever I was disciplining our son, even Isabella didn't dare argue with me. I had made it clear to her, when Mason was just learning to talk, I can let you have your way with almost anything else, but our son is my line in the sand. I will not have him grow up to be some entitled brat who thinks he can do whatever he wants because his family has money. Even though I was the one who had married in, my newfound dominance in our private life had given me some authority in the household. Plus, the success of Rick's company gave me a safety net. The Thorns knew that. On the issue of raising Mason, Isabella's father was surprisingly on my side. He'd even back me up sometimes and scold Mason himself. I figured it out eventually. Part of it was that he genuinely didn't want his grandson to be spoiled rotten. The other part was that he probably didn't want Mason to get too close to me. At least, not closer than he was to his own grandfather or his mother. At the end of the day, they still didn't see me as real family. But as long as it helped Mason grow into a decent person, I could tolerate their little mind games. It wasn't worth fighting over. But the one thing I never planned for was Isabella getting back in touch with Connor. I saw him at a cocktail party, and my stomach dropped. I asked around and found out he'd been back in the country for over a month. Connor, acting as if he'd just noticed me, strolled over with a glass of wine, a flicker of smug satisfaction in his eyes. "Leo, I never thought I'd see the day. You and Isabella married." My grip tightened on my champagne flute. I kept my face neutral and gave a slight nod. My entire history with Connor had always revolved around Isabella. Back in college, there was a period when Isabella was always finding excuses to be around me, bringing me a hot latte, helping me organize my notes. During that time, Connor would always be lurking nearby, either watching from a distance or coming over to make small talk. Eventually, he must have realized I had no romantic interest in her because he stopped showing up. We hadn't had any contact since. As I was lost in thought, Connor's voice cut through. "Oh, and tell Isabella thanks for me. She was the one who picked me up from the airport when I got back." His words cast a dark cloud over my mood. When I got home, I didn't bother asking the maids or the driver if Isabella had seen anyone recently. They were all hired by her father. They would never tell me the truth, even if she was doing something she shouldn't. So I went to find my son, who was doing his homework. I asked him if his mom had taken him to meet anyone new lately. Mason was a clinger. He insisted on going everywhere with Isabella. He stammered and avoided my gaze. I knew immediately that Isabella had told him to hide something from me. He was just a kid. After a bit of gentle prodding, he confessed that his mom had taken him to meet an Uncle Connor. I didn't need any more proof. I pushed open the bedroom door. The warm, yellow light of the bedside lamp illuminated Isabella. She had changed into a champagne-colored lace nightgown, the straps hanging loosely off her shoulders. The hem brushed against the edge of the bed, stirring up a faint, sweet scent. She walked toward me in her soft slippers, her hips swaying gently, her eyes holding a deliberately seductive gaze. But I just raised my hand and pushed her away, my face cold. Isabella stumbled back, the flirtatious look on her face freezing instantly. Her brow furrowed. "What is wrong with you?" "Connor's back," I said, my voice like ice. "You've been meeting with him. You even picked him up from the airport." Her fingers paused mid-air. Then, a smirk played on her lips, as if I were talking about something trivial. "Is that all? We're just old friends catching up." She reached out to hook a finger in my collar, her touch warm. "Look at you, getting all possessive. Let me help you relax." But the seed of disgust had already taken root. The moment her hand touched my sleeve, all my self-control shattered. "I hear there are a lot of STDs going around overseas," I said, staring in her eyes, every word laced with poison. "If you happen to get infected, don't you dare pass it on to me." In the next second, her hand clamped down on my wrist, her grip so tight it felt like it would break the bone. "What did you just say?" Her voice shot up, her eyes blazing with disbelief and fury. "Are you accusing me of cheating? Don't you know what I mean?" I sneered, trying to pull my wrist away, but her grip was like iron. "Weren't you the one who swore you weren't pathetic enough to go crawling back to an old flame who dumped you?" "Leo, you better explain yourself." Isabella completely lost it. Her grip tightened, her knuckles turning white. "What do you mean, crawling back? I had a few meals with Connor. Is that such a federal crime?" "I'm making it a crime?" My own anger flared. I yanked my arm free, causing her to stumble back, leaving red marks on my wrist. "Get a clue, Isabella. You're the one who went behind my back to secretly meet your ex-boyfriend. Do you even see me as your husband?" Suddenly, she laughed, a sound full of mockery that stabbed at my ears. "Leo, who the hell do you think you are?" She leaned in closer, her voice dripping with contempt. "You eat at my family's table. I've been too lenient with you these past few years. Did you actually start to think you were someone important?" She stared into my eyes, her every word a challenge. "Let's be clear. I didn't cheat. But even if I did, what could you possibly do about it?" A chill ran down my spine, seeping deep into my bones. Isabella's mocking smile remained, the earlier seduction in her eyes replaced by pure contempt. I suddenly thought of all the sleepless nights I'd spent working on project for her family, the business dinners where I'd drunk myself sick to protect her family's reputation, the countless times I had patiently soothed her during her tantrums. All that effort, all that sacrifice, felt like water spilled on the ground, gone without a trace. Disappointment washed over me, a heavy weight pressing on my chest. I looked at her, my voice devoid of its earlier anger, replaced by a cold, weary exhaustion. "Let's get a divorce." The sneer on her face faltered for a second, as if she hadn't heard me correctly. I repeated myself, each word sharp and clear. The projects I've managed and the profits I've earned for the Thorn family over the years are more than enough to cover the debt you paid off for me. I paused, thinking of the properties and stocks in my parents' names. I felt nothing, and if you still think it's not enough, I can pay you back the original amount with interest. The debt she had covered for me now seemed like a speck of dust compared to the tens of millions in assets my parents now held. But Isabella reacted like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. Divorce. In your dreams. I had expected as much. Where else was she going to find a husband like me? Someone faithful, who could manage her family's business, and who would put up with her temper. She just saw me as a convenient tool, always at her beck and call. She wanted my skills, but she also wanted to control my dignity. When you're that angry, you do impulsive things. I unbuckle my belt. The metal buckle hit my jeans with a sharp clack. Before Isabella could react, the leather strap whipped through the air and struck her. Are you leaving me or not? The lace nightgown offered no protection. She cried out in pain and stumbled backward. But I didn't stop. Blinded by rage, I poured years of resentment and frustration into every strike, each one harder than the last. Her screams grew shriller until her voice was raw. Unfortunately for her, she had sent the maids home for the night. No one was coming to save her. She always did like to make a scene in the living room. The noise woke our son. He came running out of his room in his little dinosaur pajamas, his face panicked. He grabbed on my pant leg. "Daddy, stop hitting Mommy." I looked down at him, at his eyes and eyebrows that were a perfect copy of Isabella's. Even the way his lip trembled when he cried was identical. A moment ago, I would have seen an adorable, innocent child. But right now, looking at his face just filled me with disgust. The doorbell rang late at night, insistent and sharp. I opened the door to find Isabella's parents standing there. The moment they stepped inside, their eyes fixed on Isabella, who was curled up on the sofa. Her earlier defiance was gone. Her lace nightgown was torn in several places, revealing a crisscross of red and purple welts on her arms and legs. She was sobbing uncontrollably. "My baby!" her mother shrieked, rushing to her side. She touched one of Isabella's bruises with a trembling finger, then spun around to face me, her eyes wide with fury, her voice like nails on a chalkboard. "Leo, do you have a death wish? How could you do this to Isabella?" Her father's face darkened, his brow deeply furrowed. I leaned against the doorframe, my expression unreadable. "I want a divorce." I paused, glancing at Isabella's tear-streaked face, and added, "Otherwise, I'll do this every day." "You have lost your mind." Her mother lunged at me, but her father held her back. He took a deep breath, tried to control his anger, and looked at me. "What happened? Tell me exactly what's going on." "She's been cheating on me with Connor," I said bluntly, my gaze fixed on Isabella. "Don't play the victim." Isabella immediately shot back, her voice still choked with tears. "I did not. Leo, don't you dare lie." "Not cheating." I scoffed. "Then prove it. Prove that when you met with Connor, all you did was have dinner. Prove there was nothing else going on." Isabella was taken aback, as if she hadn't expected me to say that. Then her voice rose. "Why should I have to prove anything? Shouldn't you be the one to prove I cheated?" I couldn't be bothered to argue with her. "Fine." I waved my hand dismissively. "Let's not waste time on a pointless debate." I turned to her father, my tone firm. "For years, I've worked my ass off for this family, managing projects, taking the fall at business dinners. If not for my contributions, at least for my effort. And what do I get? She goes behind my back to meet her ex-boyfriend and can't even tell me the truth." My eyes showed no hesitation. "I don't care what any of you say. This marriage is over." Her father's face was grim. He stared at me for a long moment, then said, his voice laced with threat, "Leo, if you go through with this divorce, you won't get a single penny. You don't need to remind me." I cut him off, my voice as calm as if I were discussing someone else's life. "I'll walk away with nothing. We can go to City Hall first thing tomorrow morning and file the papers." At the mention of me walking away with nothing, a flicker of something, calculation, crossed her father's eyes. His tense expression softened, and he even took a step closer, his tone becoming more conciliatory. "Leo, I'm sure there's just been a misunderstanding." He gestured toward Isabella on the sofa, then looked back at me. "Look, you've taken your anger out on her. You should be feeling a bit better now. Whatever the issue is, let's sit down and talk it through calmly." Let's not be so hasty about divorce. I knew he didn't really think it was a misunderstanding. He just couldn't bear to lose such a valuable workhorse. He knew as well as I did that it wouldn't be easy to find someone else who could both manage his projects and command respect in the boardroom. After years in the business world, I knew that arguing wouldn't solve anything. So I nodded and sat down in the armchair opposite them. But after nearly 2 hours of talking, we were still at a stalemate. My position hadn't changed. I wanted a divorce, period. Isabella, sitting next to her mother and wiping away tears, insisted she hadn't cheated and that her meetings with Connor were completely innocent. She refused to even consider a divorce. In the end, her father sighed in frustration, her mother continued to mutter insults under her breath, and Isabella turned her face away from me. Neither side had convinced the other. The night ended in a bitter deadlock. Her mother helped Isabella leave, probably afraid I'd start hitting her again. Her father held Mason by the arm, who looked back at me with wide, terrified eyes. I collapsed onto the sofa. The cigarette between my fingers had burned down to the filter, ash-dusting the dark carpet. Now that the adrenaline was gone, a wave of frustration washed over me. Isabella meeting her ex-boyfriend behind my back. No matter how you spun it, it was a bitter pill I couldn't swallow. Wondering if they had slept together or not was just kidding myself. If I had to stoop to investigating those kinds of details, I'd be no better than any other spineless pushover. Marrying into her family was humiliating enough. I would not tolerate being cheated on. But as frustrated as I was, I hadn't completely lost my mind. Isabella was dead set against the divorce, and I had no hard evidence of her cheating. If this went to court, it would drag on forever. I'd hit her because I thought that, being so spoiled and sheltered her whole life, one beating would be enough to scare her into agreeing to a divorce. I wasn't worried about them suing me for domestic abuse. A family like the Thorns cared about one thing above all else, their public image. If Mason ever wanted to go into politics, any kind of mark on his family record during a background check would be a disaster. How would Isabella explain that to him? Sorry, son, you failed your security clearance because your dad beat me up after I met my ex-boyfriend? Besides, people talk. If word got out that Isabella's husband had beaten her and people started asking why, what would she say? Even if she was in pain, she'd have to grit her teeth and say she fell down the stairs. She couldn't possibly admit she got beaten for secretly meeting her ex. The humiliation would be too much. But I had seriously underestimated the Thorn's stubbornness. Isabella cried and refused, and her parents never once mentioned the word divorce. It seemed my performance over the past few years had been too good. They weren't willing to let go of such a dedicated employee. After all, in their eyes, the family fortune would one day belong to Mason. Who could they trust to manage it more than his own father? Out of options, I pulled out my phone and opened the group chat he had with my 3 old friends, nicknamed the Horsemen. I hesitated for a moment, then typed, "My wife might be cheating on me. I want a divorce. Any ideas?" Seconds later, Rick's reply popped up, his fiery temper evident even in text. "I'll find a driver to run them both off the road. I'll make it look like an accident." Cody was next, his message carrying a sinister toned frowny face. "I've been working on a new tincture. Find a blind spot in your security cameras, leave it out. If she gets near it, she'll get what's coming to her. I'll handle the rest. No one will ever trace it." Finally, Gene chimed in, his tone chillingly calm, frowny face. "I can have someone send you a new neurotoxin they just developed in the States. Mix it in her wine or water. It takes about a day to kick in, and it's completely undetectable afterward." I stared at my phone, my fingers feeling numb. After we all went our separate ways, my friends had apparently gone down some very dark paths. This was all a bit much. I stood up, walked over to the coffee table, and opened a travel app on my phone. My fingers flew across the screen as I booked the earliest direct flight back to my hometown. I packed light, just a few changes of clothes. When the plane landed the next morning, the sun in my hometown felt warm and welcoming. "Sweetheart, what a surprise," my mom said, looking genuinely happy to see me. "You should have called. I would have made your favorite ribs." Even though I lived far away, I made sure my parents were comfortable. I'd bought them a villa with a garden and cars they were still too frugal to drive often. I covered all their expenses. They adored me. They would never give me the cold shoulder like the Thorns did. That night at dinner, I casually mentioned, "I'm thinking about divorcing Isabella." The atmosphere at the table changed instantly. My mom's soup spoon froze midair. Then, a smile broke out across her face. Really? Oh, that's wonderful news. My dad put down his newspaper and sat up straight, his eyes full of pride. It's about time. Our family isn't struggling anymore. There's no reason for you to be taking their crap. It was just that no parents, once they have money, want to see their son living in his wife's shadow. It was a source of embarrassment for them among relatives, especially now that we were well off and there were more jealous family members eager to gossip. You've been working so hard for so long. You deserve a good, long rest, my mom said. I nodded, sipping the warm soup, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. We had signed a prenup. The Thorne family's assets had nothing to do with me. I'd never signed an employment contract with their company, so even if it went bankrupt tomorrow, it couldn't touch me. As for Mason, I pictured his face, so much like Isabella's, and felt nothing. His own mother, who carried him for 9 months, could sneak off to meet her ex-boyfriend without a second thought. Why should I, an outsider in their family, care more than she did? After dinner, I sat in a wicker chair in our yard, watching my dad water his flowers and my mom clear away the tea set. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, warm and drowsy. I realized then how easy life could be away from the Thorns. While Leo was sunbathing in his parents' yard, sipping his mom's chrysanthemum tea, the air in the Thorne mansion was thick with tension. It wasn't that the Thorne Corporation couldn't function without Leo. Isabella's father had been running the family business for decades. He wouldn't let the absence of one person throw everything into chaos. But Leo's departure was abrupt. Several major projects he had been leading were now without a manager. Her father, who had been enjoying semi-retirement, was forced to pick up the slack. He was at the office before 7 every morning and buried in reports and contracts until late at night. Even during meals, he was constantly on the phone, his voice heavy with fatigue. Who would willingly give up a comfortable life to throw themselves back into that kind of grind? With no other outlet for his frustration, Isabella's father took it out on her every night. He'd see her picking at her food at the dinner table, and he'd slam his chopsticks down, throwing a file onto her placemat. Look at the mess you've made. The company is in chaos, and I, a man nearly 60 years old, have to stay up all night cleaning it up. Isabella would shrink in her seat, not daring to speak. If her mother tried to intervene, her father would silence her with a glare. Don't you defend her. None of this would have happened if she hadn't been so reckless. Show me one other man who married into a family who is as capable and devoted as Leo. One evening, after finishing his work, Isabella's father came home to find her sitting alone in the living room, staring into space. He managed to ask with a sliver of patience, "Be honest with me. Why did you have to hide it from Leo? Why did you sneak around to meet Connor?" Isabella's fingers tightened on the sofa's throw pillow. Her voice was barely a whisper, but her answer was so absurd it was almost laughable. I was afraid if I told Leo, you wouldn't let me go, and he'd be angry. You knew he'd be angry. So why did you do it? Are you really that clueless? His words seemed to hit a nerve. Isabella pressed her lips together, buried her head even lower, and refused to say another word. Her father looked at her and knew exactly what was going on. When a married woman meets her ex-boyfriend, it's usually for one of two reasons. Either she's not over him, still clinging to the past, or she's bored with the stability of married life and looking for a thrill to fill a void. Isabella knew this herself, but how could she ever admit that to her parents? Her father sighed, his voice full of disappointment. So what's your plan now? Are you just going to let this drag on? Or are you going to divorce him? No. Isabella shot up as if she'd been electrocuted, her eyes wide with panic. We can't get a divorce. She clutched the pillow, her voice trembling. If we get divorced, what will happen to Mason? And what will people say about our family? I'll go to him. I'll apologize. He'll forgive me. I know he will. What she didn't say was that, over the years, she had grown accustomed to having Leo in her life. Isabella stood at the gate of the yard at Leo's parents' house, still wearing the carefully chosen cream-colored dress she had traveled in. "Mom," she said, her voice so soft it was almost carried away by the wind. Her knuckles were white as she gripped the strap of her handbag. Leo's mother didn't stop what she was doing. She continued to pinch the yellowed leaves off the vegetables in her lap, tossing them into a bag at her feet. She didn't even look up. The sunlight caught the silver in her hair, casting her in a hard, unforgiving light. In all these years, besides a perfunctory mom at the wedding, Isabella had never offered her more than a nod. There was never any warmth. Leo's mother knew that in Isabella's eyes, she was just the mother of the guy who married in, someone insignificant. Now, after her son had told her about the possible cheating, she had lost all patience for pleasantries. She treated the woman at her gate like a piece of furniture. Isabella stood frozen, the sweet scent of osmanthus from the garden doing little to warm the chill of her reception. The humiliation of being completely ignored burned her cheeks. She took a deep breath and took a few steps forward, her voice slightly louder this time. "Mom, I'm here to see Leo. He's not answering my calls." This time, Leo's mother stopped working. She placed her basket on the stone step and slowly stood up, brushing the dirt from her hands. She turned, her face expressionless, and her gaze swept over Isabella, as if she were an inanimate object. "He's out, but even if he were here, I doubt he'd want to see you for any reason other than a divorce." I was pulling into the driveway, my cooler heavy with 3 large bass, when I saw Isabella standing at our gate. The good mood from a successful morning of fishing evaporated instantly. She really was pathetic. After my mother refused to let her in, she just stood there at the gate, not daring to take a single step onto the property. "Are you here to sign the divorce papers?" I asked, setting the cooler down on a step. The water sloshed inside, and my tone was just as cold. Isabella's head snapped up, her eyes lighting up. She rushed toward me, reaching for my arm. "Leo, please forgive me. Believe me, I didn't cheat. I love you, I really do." The moment her fingers touched my sleeve, my mind flashed to a viral video I'd seen a few days earlier. In the video, a woman was sobbing in a man's arms, crying, "I'm not pregnant. He didn't do anything." Her pitiful act was a mirror image of Isabella's right now. A wave of nausea hit me. I jerked my arm back, turned, and dry heaved into the flower bed. Isabella's hand froze in midair. The desperation on her face turned to an ashen fury. "Leo, has it come to this? The very thought of me touching you makes you sick." I wiped my mouth and stood up, looking at her with a flat, emotionless expression. "Yes, it does. So do us both a favor. Let me go, and let yourself go." My words were like a slap across her face. Her lips trembled with humiliation, but she didn't leave. For the next week, she was like clockwork, standing outside our gate every day, rain or shine. My mom couldn't stand it anymore. She pulled me aside and whispered, "If you really want her gone, I have a way." I didn't hesitate. I nodded. The next day, I went out to talk to Isabella. I deliberately softened my voice. "If you can make my mom happy, I'll call off the divorce." Her eyes lit up with a desperate hope. She grabbed my hand. "Really, I'll do anything. I'll make her happy." Her optimism didn't last long. My mother made her wash clothes by hand. After that, she made her clean the house, all while my mom sat there cracking sunflower seeds and spitting the shells on the floor. My mom would accidentally spill water on the floor Isabella had just mopped. Within a week, Isabella stopped coming to our gate. If she saw my mother from a distance, she would cross the street to avoid her. On the day she was finally leaving, she hesitated at the end of the lane before coming over to me. "Leo," she said, her tone testing the waters, "Mason is asking for me at home. He misses his mommy." I stared at her. "Did you think about your son when you were cheating?" Isabella opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "Don't forget why we got together in the first place." I sneered. "It was a business transaction. You paid my debt, and I married into your family. When we made that deal, you were the one who swore you would never cheat. You broke the contract. I don't know why you're trying to act like you're so deeply in love with me now." I leaned in closer, my eyes filled with contempt. "If you really love me that much, go put a knife in Connor to prove your innocence. You dare. Or how about you bankrupt his family? Find a way to send him to prison to make me feel better? Pick one. Otherwise, stop with the act. Anyone can say pretty words." My words left Isabella pale and speechless. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Finally, she clutched her handbag and walked away without looking back. I didn't bring up the divorce again. The law states that after 2 years of separation, a divorce is automatically granted. 2 years was just enough time for me to find a decent, honest woman to marry. The timing would be perfect. I was shocked when, a month later, I heard that Connor Hayes had been arrested for sexual assault. The person who reported him was Isabella. This was an unexpected development. My plan to have Rick arrange a little accident for Connor had to be put on hold. I'm no saint. He tried to steal my wife. I had every reason to go after him. I just never expected Isabella to make the first move. Later, Isabella tried to use it to get back in my good graces, excitedly telling me how she had set Connor up and recorded the evidence. I felt nothing. The divorce proceedings continued as planned. 2 years later, I successfully filed for divorce, severing all ties with the Thorne family. Isabella brought Mason with her on the day it was finalized, a last-ditch effort. I waved my son. Mason, remember this. Your mom and I are getting divorced because she cheated. If you're going to hate someone, hate her, not me. Isabella covered his ears and ran. Meanwhile, after Connor's imprisonment, a corporate war erupted between the Thorne and Hayes families. In a surprise move, Rick's Pantheon Games intervened. Caught in a pincer attack, the Hayes Corporation was wiped off the map in Westridge. When Connor was eventually released from prison, he stood outside the gates for hours, but no one came to pick him up. He had to take a taxi home. The kind-hearted taxi driver, seeing his pathetic state, gave him a bottle of water. When he finally got home, he found the house empty. His parents had taken what little assets they had left and fled the country, where Jean was already preparing a welcome party for them. The next day, his body was found under a bridge.